The plan of the armed forces of the Philippines is to engage China in a asymmetric, just in case it pushes on shove. Hopefully, it will not come to this situation. Is to prepare for possible asymmetric conflict with China by simply relying on anti-access area denial.
Okay.
So we develop limited naval and air capabilities, then of course acquisition of BrahMos, then of course strengthening the Philippine Navy, so that at least we could force the Chinese to think twice or even thrice if they would have to use force against us.
Welcome to The Gist on StratNewsGlobal. I'm Ramananda Sengupta. In our studio today is our special guest, Dr. Renato Cruz De Castro, distinguished professor in the International Studies Department de la Salle University, Manila. He also holds a professorial chair in China Studies, and he's also known as a maritime expert. Dr. Castro was in New Delhi to attend the first Chanakya Defense Dialogue, where he delivered a talk on collaborative partnerships for security. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
It's an honor on my part to be here in your studio.
So let's take it from the top. Just a couple of weeks ago, they had the Belt and Road Initiative, the forum, 10th year of the Belt and Road Initiative, where your president, Mr. Marcos, had gone. And now, recently, they're saying that they're coming out of the BRI. They're canceling a lot of projects. What is that all about? What happened in between?
Well, China simply did not deliver. China promised, the former President Rodrigo Duterte, $24 billion when he went to Beijing in October 2016 for major, funding of major infrastructure projects during the term of the former President Rodrigo Duterte. China did not deliver the money. There were only two projects that were funded. One, of course, was an irrigation project. The other one was about dam. They have nothing to do with infrastructure programs. So, basically what the Chinese did was to hang a carrot for the Philippine donkey to try to catch. But of course, it was simply left there dangling. So it's a case of unfulfilled promise on the part of China. So what do you expect the current president to do? He simply is trying to send a message to China, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on us Filipinos. So that's why he decided to make the smart move. Basically announce to the world, we're leaving the Belt and Road Initiative of China, which of course was very much detrimental to Philippine national interests.
Sir, could you tell us a bit more about the Sierra Madrid, the World War II ship that was sort of deliberately put on a shoal and somewhere in the Spratly Islands for Philippines to sort of...
Okay, let me give you a background. This was, of course, after the Philippines discovered that China has already occupied Mischief Reef. This was, of course, in 1996.
Right.
So Philippines was taken aback. Like suddenly you have the Chinese there occupying a reef, an inhabited reef, which could not even sustain life. And at the time, the Chinese were telling us, this is just shelter for our fisher folks. And you can even have your fisher folks coming here because it will provide shelter to all fisher folks of all countries. But eventually we knew for a fact China was, of course, pulling our leg.
Right.
Later on, we see China starting to build antennas, trying to transform those wooden huts into concrete bunkers.
Oh.
So, and then we realized what was basically the Chinese game plan. The Chinese game plan is to occupy uninhabited islands, then, of course, or land features. I have to emphasize land features. Shoals, rifts, then later on, they would transform them to artificial islands. But of course, it was also already concerned by 1997, 1998. So at that time, the Secretary of National Defense, Orlando Mercado, approached President Estrada and said, the Chinese are trying to control those uninhabited land features. We have to do something. Or they would surround our, the land feature that we occupied called Kitu or Pag-asa Island. So the decision then was, of course, beach a old landing ship tank. That was built during the Second World War. So the initial statement of the Philippines was it was an accident. But of course, right now, the Philippine government is openly saying it is a deliberate action to prevent China's creeping occupation that was happening in the mid-1990s. And China did not bother us for a very long time. We maintained a very small garrison of Marines that had been supplied. But of course, things had changed. Since 2014, China already showed that we have the capacity to impose. And of course, the Philippine government, the armed forces of the Philippines are very careful in using this term, blockade. So the first time they did this blockade was in 2014, but we were able to get through the resupply by using a wooden ship that has, of course, been commissioned. Not a ship of the Philippine Navy, but a commissioned ship of the Philippine Navy.
Okay.
So that resupply operation has been ongoing. Then suddenly, of course, China started to tighten the screw around the blockade. So since last year, they've started harassing the convoy. You have, of course, 2 commissioned ships, wooden ships by the Philippine Navy, protected by the Philippine Coast Guard, just to basically indicate. So the Chinese are using their Coast Guard, their maritime militia, and recently we have also witnessed just on the background, the presence of the People's Liberation Army's Navy, the gray ships. And so they're becoming more tense than ever. As an analyst, I have this gut feeling that sooner or later, of course, China might use force. The last operation was, of course, marred by collisions.
That's right.
The Chinese are basically sending us a message. We're starting to really tighten the screw. Sooner or later, you might have, of course, the gray ships of the People's Liberation Army's Navy, conducting an effective blockade.
But even the Coast Guard ships are far larger than any other.
Yes, of course, and they're armed. Our Coast Guard ships are not armed because they were given to us by Japan.
Right.
The Japanese are very strict pacifist constitution that they could only provide, of course, unarmed multi-purpose patrol ships.
And earlier they used to use those water cannons and stuff.
They stopped using the water cannon, but now, of course, they're starting to be more daring by effecting collisions. Very gentle collision at this point in time. Sooner or later, I guess, the collisions will be harder. Then sooner or later, again, this is my gut feeling, you might have gunfire coming from the, People's Liberation Army's Navy ship, or even probably from their Coast Guard vessels.
Wow. That's quite a frightening thought. But do you think this recent sort of escalation has anything to do with the sort of distraction now in the Middle East with the Americans?
Yes, but they started to tighten the screw this year when the current administration effected a major change in Philippine foreign policy and defense policy. When, of course, he announced in early this year that we will allow greater American strategic footprints in the Philippines.
Okay.
By opening, originally you have 5 Philippine Armed Forces bases, and inside those bases we have what we call joint location. Okay. Facilities of the Armed Forces of the Philippines where the Americans could, of course, improve or build, but they're still owned by the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Okay. So therefore joint use. They are not American bases. So from the original 5 that was agreed upon in 2016, this administration offered the Americans 4 more, and they're, of course, located,
that's 9.
But this 4, of course, is significant because they're located in northern Luzon.
Oh, okay.
So, again, we use the term, it is for humanitarian assistance and risk reduction, just in case you have a major contingency in Taiwan, where we have about 200,000 Filipinos working. So, but of course, if push comes to shove, they could be used by both sides. But of course, if they will be used by the Americans, they will be only allowed upon the permission of the Philippines. They're not American bases. So after, of course, you have this announcement, after, of course, you have several projects going on in those joint facilities, the Chinese took note of this and, of course, starting to put pressure on us, not only in Ayungin Shoal, but recently also in Scarborough Shoal.
Oh, okay. And that also turned violent in some ways? Did that also turn violent, or was that just pressure?
Pressure, but, expect the worst from the Chinese, especially once they really get angry at you. So, prior, of course, to President Marcos' declaration that we are leaving the Belt and Road Initiative, there were actually 3 major projects that the Chinese promised to fund. 3 big-ticket railroad projects.
Right.
One connecting southern part of the Philippines to the southernmost portion in the Bicol area. Then you have a rail system around Mindanao. Then another rail system that would link the former U.S. bases Clark Air Base in Angeles City. Then the other one, of course, is the Naval Base, Subic Naval Base to Olongapo. The Chinese showed that they're not interested in funding it. So that was, of course, the signal that it's time for the Philippines to leave the Belt and Road Initiative, because those three big ticket items were not being funded by the Chinese, despite an earlier promise that they're committed to fund those projects.
Are there other people stepping in to sort of fund similar projects now?
Hopefully, it will be the Japanese, the South Koreans, or even the South Koreans, Japanese, and probably the Europeans.
Okay.
India might be interested.
But I would have thought that strategically it would have made sense for the Chinese to at least fund those, symbolically, the two bases as it,
Yeah, there are also other issues related to that. More of the specifics, like, of course, this was announced by the former Director General of the National Economic Development Authority. The Philippines has simply gotten used or spoiled by the Japanese and the South Koreans when it comes to infrastructure development. The Japanese would give you money, but then the Japanese or the South Koreans will tell you, this is the money, but you have to choose Japanese companies.
Okay.
So at least the money leaves Tokyo, enters the Philippine economy, and of course, even if it's a Japanese corporation or a South Korean corporation that will be doing that infrastructure project, you have them employing Filipinos.
Right.
The Chinese have a different way of playing it.
Of course.
They
bring their own people.
Yeah, they bring their own people. Money never leaves Beijing. It just changed pocket in Beijing. So they do not generate employment. And at the end of the day, you end up in the debt trap like what happened in Sri Lanka.
I hope all the people who are borrowing money from the Chinese hear this.
Yeah.
That's the thing. There was also this, I think President Marcos is trying to strengthen the military in some ways. I mean, he's ordered some BrahMos missiles from India.
Yes.
And I think there's some other ways of trying to strengthen the forces. What are the other steps that are being taken to strengthen the forces? And are those symbolic or are they actually...
Well, the plan of the armed forces of the Philippines is to engage China in a asymmetric, just in case it pushes on shove. Hopefully, it will not come to this situation. Is to prepare for possible asymmetric conflict with China by simply relying on anti-access area denial.
Okay.
So we develop limited naval and air capabilities, then of course acquisition of BrahMos, then of course strengthening the Philippine Navy, so that at least we could force the Chinese to think twice or even thrice if they would have to use force against us.
Okay.
But of course, this buildup is also linked with our alliance with the United States. We have the Mutual Defense Treaty with the United States. And the Americans, no less than President Joe Biden announced, any attack on Philippine public vessel, Philippine Coast Guard, or Armed Forces of the Philippines would trigger the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty with the United States.
Okay, but so far that's just a warning.
That's why we're also allowing the Americans to have greater strategic footprint. So just this November, you'll have a major military exercise. Have about 4 U.S. allies.
Okay.
Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and of course the United States. This will be an exercise by their respective Marines. Of course, Japan does not have a Marine, so they're sending their ground self-defense force. But this is something significant.
Oh, it's very significant and it will be held off the Philippine coast.
In Luzon, and the United Kingdom will be sending an observer.
Oh, okay.
So the UK is also showing much interest in what's happening in the Philippines.
But you had, the Japanese Prime Minister Kishida was just recently in Manila. I think he even addressed your parliament, and he also talked about a mutual defense pact or something.
The reciprocal access agreement.
What does that mean?
That's similar to what we have with the United States and Australia status of force agreement.
Okay.
So Japanese forces will be coming to the Philippines upon our invitation. So they should not be considered as occupiers.
Right.
So that's a message there. And they will be provided legal guarantees. Just in case they commit crimes, there are specific provisions on how these issues will be handled.
Okay.
So we have the same arrangement with the Americans. We call it the Visiting Force Agreement. We have the same arrangement with the Australians. We call it Status of Force Agreement. And of course, with the Japanese, the Reciprocal Access Agreement. So this will mean greater Japanese participation just in case you have a major natural disaster, which the Japanese, during the time when we have this major typhoon that hit central Philippines, the Japanese sent the largest contingent of forces after the Second World War to Leyte, incidentally in Leyte in 2013. So there's no more need for us to sign a temporary terms of reference on how those forces will be treated, because we have now the reciprocal access agreement. And I think the Philippine Senate indicated that you're basically telling the executive that we would concur to this agreement if the executive would sign it. So there's already strong support coming from our legislator.
Is that similar to the sort of logistical agreement called LEMOA or something that we have with India, the Americans, similar to that?
Yeah, we have the mutual logistic support, which is, it's really more of, you have, let's say, a Japanese plane that needs to be refueled, then they'll be refueled. And of course, if a Philippine plane would go to Japan, then it would be refueled. This is also significant because, especially when we talk about Japan, we have the status of force agreement with Australia, but Australia is far.
Yeah.
We have the visiting force agreement with the United States. But again, Guam is not very far, but Hawaii and continental USA is kind of far. It's different with Japan. Japan is very close to the Philippines. So it will be easier for us to send our Navy, our Army, our Marines, our Air Force to conduct joint military exercises with the Japanese, because Japan is not very far. It will be conducted in Japan. But most probably, most of the time, you'll have the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, Ground Self-Defense Force, even the Air Self-Defense Force, conducting joint training, not only with the Philippines, but possibly also with the Americans. So this also raises the prospect of a trilateral security cooperation.
Right.
Philippines, Japan, and the United States, and the Australians are also showing their interest.
So it will almost be like another Quad kind of thing. Not Quad, but
yeah. Some people are saying this is sort of another Quad, except you don't have India.
Yeah.
You have the
but
Philippines.
Also they still haven't decided whether or not the Quad is a security arrangement or not.
Yeah, but definitely this is security, because all of us are American allies. But we have a security partnership with India. We considered India as a security partner.
Yeah, I'll come back to that. But there was also talk of some non-aggression pact that was supposed to be signed between China and the countries in that region. That's been pending for a while, and I believe recently they said it'll take 3 more years for it to be done. Why is it up?
This reminds me of non-aggression pact between Germany and the Soviet Union before the Second World War. So every time you have that term, it reminds me of this the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact of Steel, which of course amounted to Germany eventually attacking. So I don't know what would resonate within Southeast Asia, especially the term non-aggression pact. This is a type of agreement that was signed by the communist countries, by the Soviet Union and China.
Right.
And basically what happened is that they break it.
Of course. Of course.
No, what you're talking about probably was a code of conduct that has been frozen there. The idea for code of conduct came out after the Philippines and the ASEAN China and the ASEAN countries signed the declaration on the code of conduct, indicating that they have an interest in coming out with a code of conduct. That was in 2002. It's now 2023.
That's right.
Nothing has happened.
So where is it stuck?
I'll just tell you what happened. So this has been basically in the limbo from 2002 to around 2017. Then suddenly China said, we're interested in a code of conduct.
Okay.
But this was a year after our arbitral tribunal on the United Nations Law of the Sea came out with the ruling that China's expansive claim in the South China Sea simply doesn't have any legal nor historical basis. So I think this is basically a tactical concession on the part of China when it suddenly told the ASEAN countries, I'm open for a negotiation for a code of conduct.
Okay.
But of course, the difference between the code of conduct and the arbitral ruling is the fact the arbitral ruling basically states what's the cause of this tension in the South China Sea.
Right.
It's the unlawful expansive claim of China. This is not touched by the code of conduct. The code of conduct merely states the need to manage the dispute, but it does not tackle the source of dispute, which is Chinese maritime expansion in the South China Sea. So that's the first issue there. So the Philippines, and recently supported by Indonesia, indicated that if there's any code of conduct, it should be based on the United Nations Law of the Sea.
This the Chinese won't agree.
They won't agree. Second, of course, is the issue of the geographic scope. The Chinese position is that this should only cover areas of the South China Sea that's not, under Chinese jurisdiction.
Which is nothing. Where is
because China claims 90% of the South China Sea. So it will not apply to waters that the Chinese considers as theirs. So the third issue there has something to do whether it's binding or not. The Chinese position is that it should be voluntary. The ASEAN position is it should be binding.
There's no point making it voluntary then. I mean,
and the fourth, of course, is we know for a fact that this is a Chinese ploy. It's a Chinese gambit because the Chinese is asking a concession from the member states of ASEAN. We want any military exercise to be conducted by the 10 member states with any external actor should be reported to ASEAN and China. So in a way, this would give China a veto if we will conduct military exercise, let's say, with the Americans, with the South Koreans, with the Japanese, with the Australians, even with India. So China will have a veto on the type of military relations we will have with what China would call the external powers.
Why would somebody agree to that?
Yeah, no way. Yeah, that's basically what everybody now is saying, that this is simply a Chinese ploy. While it strengthens its control over the South China Sea, then it's giving a false hope to ASEAN, the possibility of a code of conduct, which will actually amount to nothing.
Okay, but which sort of brings me to my next question, which is that with the Philippines sort of now becoming a sort of a major player opposing this whole thing. I mean, coming out and opposing. Do you think it will inspire others in the ASEAN region to sort of push back like this?
Probably the maritime Southeast Asian countries. Probably you might have sympathy from Indonesia, although Indonesia is not a claimant state. Malaysia might be interested, but we have an issue with Malaysia.
Right.
And that's, of course, our territorial dispute over Sabah. Vietnam is interested, but Vietnam is also caught in a dilemma. I've talked with the Vietnamese. They said, we cannot go all out against China for two reasons. Number one, we have a territorial dispute with China in the maritime domain, but we share a land border with China. And of course, the other factor there is any dispute between China and Vietnam is handled by the Inter-Party Committee. Vietnam and China are still communist parties.
Right.
If the tension is becoming intense, one of the communist party would raise the fact that we share the common history in driving out the French.
Okay.
Yeah, during the period of Ho Chi Minh, Dien Bien Phu. I've seen how the Vietnamese had played this game, and of course also reminding how China assisted North Vietnam during the War for National Unification. So that really puts the Philippines really in the center. In a way, if you have to analyze Philippine foreign policy and comparing it to the 9 other ASEAN countries, the Philippines' approach is in a way unique by itself. For two reasons. Number one, we have a territorial dispute with China.
Right.
Vietnam has a territorial dispute with China, but they can manage it. Malaysia is, again, Malaysia's further south. But the other factor, of course, is we have an alliance with the United States.
And Japan.
And Japan. And, of course, also the fact that we're getting support from security partners like South Korea, Australia, and India. So from the perspective of the Japanese, this is simply emboldening the Philippines.
Right.
You're pushing us to those countries that are sympathetic to us. Now you're blaming us for being emboldened by that support. So this is, basically, I cannot simply understand the Chinese logic.
So that brings me to the other question that, in that area, and you've been studying history, and we were talking earlier about us not learning from history. What kind of options do you see for the entire region now? Do you see it in a pessimistic sort of a manner, or do you think there's room for some hope?
Well, we can hope for the best, but let's expect the worst. The worst is the fact that in the case of the Philippines, we're not only confronted by one major geostrategic flashpoint. That's, of course, the South China Sea. We're also concerned what's happening north of the Philippines.
Of course.
That's Taiwan.
Right.
And I think the Taiwan issue is the quintessential flashpoint in the Indo-Pacific region, because just in case China decides to invade Taiwan, they will not only be linked with the Taiwanese. There are already indications that the Americans would defend Taiwan. That's why it accounts for the fact that the Americans are very much interested, of course, upon the invitation of the Philippine government, to improve those what we call enhanced defense cooperation agreement sites. And 3 of them, I would emphasize again, are located in northern Luzon, not very far from Taiwan.
Right.
And this is something that the Chinese have also taken into account.
Mm-hmm. But that would, I mean, you see, from all accounts, the Chinese are adamant on sort of getting it before 2040 or whatever it is.
2027 is supposed to be.
Wow. Okay, that's
a statement of the Taiwanese foreign minister. It's based on two things. Number one, it's the 100th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army,
right.
and the 100th anniversary of the start of the Chinese Civil War.
Okay.
So
she wants to celebrate that with the win.
and of course, also in a way, outperform Mao Zedong. Although he admires Mao Zedong, he, his family suffered during the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. He wanted a revenge against Mao Zedong by, of course, reforming something that Mao Zedong failed to accomplish. That is, of course, ending the Chinese Civil War and effecting eventually the unification between China and Taiwan. So that's my take.
Is there a possibility of, China sort of somehow wrangling a semi-democratic way of Taiwan saying that, we'll join?
Not under President Xi Jinping, who's basically taking a very hardline position. As long as he's there, as long as, his faction dominates the Communist Party, as long as the Communist Party controls China, and of course the People's Liberation Army is looking at itself as the instrument,
right,
as the gun, that's controlled by the party, I tend to be on the pessimistic side.
And do you have this, presidential contender in the U.S.? I don't know if that Indian chap Ramaswamy, he's supposed to be more Trump than Trump, but he had made some interesting remarks. He said that if he becomes president, what he would like to do is to sort of, as far as Taiwan is concerned, is to take away their microprocessing facilities first, and then tell China, go ahead and take Taiwan, we don't care.
Okay, but I don't, that's only for campaign. You don't usually, those candidates, what they say during election period, you have to, take it with a grain of salt.
He's been saying all kinds of funny
they're all things, But once they're in position, they'll be briefed by their National Security Council, they'll be briefed by the Pentagon, by the State Department. So eventually, they would have to toe the official line. So this is what former President Trump called the deep state.
That's right.
So no matter how you want to change U.S. defense and foreign policy, you're stuck inside the deep state.
True.
So what you usually see is, of course, continuity in policy rather than change. Plus, of course, there's only one issue that unites Americans, given the fact that the society is highly divided.
Right.
And that's, of course, China.
Right now, yes, but they could modify it to something else.
Yeah, we can. Let's see. I'm not discounting that possibility.
And where do you see Russia in this whole game? Where do you see Russia in this whole game?
India is so much concerned. Russia is so much concerned with Ukraine. It's also concerned with NATO, especially, have a buildup in NATO forces. You have Finland joining NATO, and of course, eventually you have Sweden. So Russia's focus is primarily still Europe. Traditionally, Russia and even the Soviet Union had always focused on Europe.
That's true. But, I was talking to a Japanese diplomat a few days back, and he said that they were worried about, about Russians coming down from that other side, from the, what do you call it? From the Alaska.
Kurils,
the Vostok side. When China sort of decides to elect, so they have to prepare for that kind of...
Yeah, sure. Yeah, maybe.
And then North Korea as well.
Okay, yes. I don't discount this possibility, but what could Russia bring coming from there? The resources, their attention are still focused on Ukraine. They might. I'm not discounting that possibility. That's a legitimate concern of the Japanese.
And they also said that we are still undecided on whether, in case Taiwan is invaded, whether or not we are going to get involved unless Japan too is invaded.
Well, the possible growing presence and interest of Japan to sign a reciprocal access agreement is giving the Japanese an option.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So, when they make decisions like this, they're not yet sure what to do, but at least at this point in time, they're looking at options. They're looking at opportunities, because at the end of the day, it's political willingness that would matter.
Absolutely. That's what they said, that, that we'll have to talk to the people to see whether they're okay with suddenly taking on China in that sense. So I'll ask you the last question, which relates to India. Is India doing enough in that region, or should it do enough? Should it do more?
I'm looking at it, based on my assessment, India, of course, has a more urgent homework, and that is to consolidate South Asia.
Absolutely. We have a land border with China as well.
So one way, of course, for you to consolidate it is to keep China busy in our part of the world. So that's the time you also have to be involved in East Asia to keep China occupied, so that India would have the best opportunity, the golden opportunity to consolidate your control in South Asia, or your leadership in South Asia. So that's basically my advice, a humble advice from a militarily weak middle country in Southeast Asia.
Cool. I mean, what exactly would you expect India to do more in that?
Greater naval presence, investment in the region. You have a lot of technologies that you can share, industries you can share, you can transfer to Southeast Asia, to the Philippines.
And but aren't we already doing that? You said we have a strategic agreement in some level.
But we're still waiting for more. For India to put its money where its mouth is.
That's a lot of people have been asking that question. I hear you. I hear you on that one. And the last question would be that we already have we've been saying that our area of focus is the Bay of Bengal more than the South China Sea, because that's not really our turf in that sense. In terms of India's immediate strategic concerns is more with the Bay of Bengal and the other side, the western side of the thing. But they've also refused to join all these freedom of navigation movements and stuff like that, simply because, just like Vietnam, I think they're saying that we don't really want to keep poking China in the eye all the time. We just want to leave that thing. Is that a valid?
Well, as I noticed this, I was not able to visit India since, my last conference was in 2019, then the pandemic. But I noticed a degree of national confidence, national pride, and also national sense of the fact that India is more powerful than 3 or 4 years ago. So I think the capabilities, the opportunities are there. Again, it's a matter of India's willingness. Do you want to get involved in what's happening in East Asia so that it would distract China from basically preventing you from consolidating your leadership in South Asia?
Oh, absolutely. Of course. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much again for the honor. I really enjoyed it.
I learned so much in just this conversation myself. That was Professor Renato Cruz De Castro talking to us about the situation in the South China Sea, and he brought in so many various aspects which a lot of us don't really know about. So I think anybody who's interested in the region should listen to this particular video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe at the end of it. Till we meet again, this is Ramananda Sengupta signing off.